Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 35. As always, I'm going to start us off with a tune, so I'll just boom my way into that one. Assuming I can. Right. Okay, that was the Willow Tree, which is a traditional English song sung by the Cambridge Singers, and it comes from the excellent channel Patriotic Archive. Okay, guys, I'm going to do as I usually do, go around and ask you guys if there's anything you'd like to bring up as a first subject, starting with the Albion.
Evening, everyone, or morning to Duke. I haven't got a particular story in mind, but I'm sure that there's one that is going to come up if Napoleon doesn't have anything else to bring.
All right, Napoleon, go for it.
No, not really. I think the Plymouth story has kind of trumped everything.
Yeah, I thought we'd end up talking about that one, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think about that, guys?
Well, that's a big question. Well, what do we think of it? It's obviously distressing and upsetting to see, but it's sort of not a surprise anymore. And I'm actually quite surprised we haven't seen more of it in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon, anything to add to that?
I think the reason why we don't get it in Britain as much is because I don't think we have as large of an incel community here as they do in America, which is a very, very nice change of pace. Nah, sorry, Ozzy, I'm not changing.
What do you think is the cause of the difference? Why do you think that there's a larger incel community in America?
Because America is full of woofters and people who are unattractive and like 5'8". So yeah, I feel like we're doing a lot better in that regard.
Is it that we're doing better, or we just haven't hit that point yet?
I'd say we're coping better. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I'll tell you a couple of observations that occurred to me. I mean, the first thing I'll say is that immediately you see people calling for even tougher controls on firearms. Like, you know, Britain's not the least armed place in bloody Europe even now. And of course, people kill people, not firearms. The other thing, of course, is that because this is a white guy, it's going to be used just to reinforce the straight white male agenda, which many politicians and people in the mainstream media have. And we're already seeing that to some degree, I think. And my final observation is, to what degree has all of these constant lockdowns for what is in effect not a particularly dangerous virus for most people, how much has that affected people's mental health? Because I think it probably has a fair amount.
That's a good point. That's one actually I hadn't really thought about. You know, with the protests that we saw throughout the summer, these were people taking an opportunity to get out into the streets and vent. And because that was being done on a group level, there was no individual responsibility being attached to the people involved. Obviously, with this incident, it's one person, and so we can. Well, I don't want to attribute it without knowing for certain, but it's definitely not going to help.
Napoleon, anything to add to that?
The crackdown on guns because of one individual is because of one individual case is kind of stupid, I guess. If it was like an actual problem, if how would I say this? If fuck, I don't know how to word it, but yeah,
it wouldn't be such a shocking story if it was something.
Yeah,
that was actually
it'd be absolutely it would be absolutely stupid if they were trying to make this about guns, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was talking to the Albion before we started the stream, and one thing, as I said to him, you have to notice the very different treatment that the mainstream media and the politicians give to this case, because this is a straight white male, to had it been, shall we say, someone who was more diverse. You know, there's a very different treatment around it because of the fact that this is a straight white English guy. So, you know.
Yeah, as I mentioned just before we came on live, the reporting before there was any information about the shooter was some of the most neutral reporting I've seen in years, because they didn't want to put too much negative connotations on until they had clarification that he was he fits a certain profile.
Yeah.
So there was just the facts until they had confirmed that he could fit a narrative, and it was quite disgusting to see the change from neutral reporting to this is the agenda, run with that immediately. Because it was in the span of of an hour from when we first saw it to when the narrative has been changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this every time. When something initially happens, the MSM adopt a very, very neutral and low-key approach, and it will only really blow up into an enormous story if the culprit it turns out not to be diverse. If it's diverse, then it's all played down.
Yeah, but that's expected anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. As Ozzy said in the chat here, people died, but is he white? That seems to be the MSM's main question, really. So, I think we can certainly say that is going on around that narrative. And I mean, you can contrast it to the other major news story at the moment, which is the poor women's in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
I had my usual look at the poisonous bias brainwashing corporation site before the stream. And like most of their world news and some of their UK news is absolutely dominated by the women's in Afghanistan. And it is only about the women. They're not going on about anything else much. Bugger the blokes, bugger the kids. It's the women. So, I don't know, man. It's just so crazy. Because, again, as we were speaking about before the stream started, Britain lost, 450, nearly 500 dead in Afghanistan for absolutely no purpose whatsoever. And I'm sorry, I don't think it's worth the bones of one more British soldier. I don't care what happens there. If the Afghans want the Taliban, let them have the bloody Taliban. I do not care. And I certainly don't care about the Afghan women's.
Boomer Nick. You're such a boomer, Duke.
Why? Why am I a boomer?
No. I was just joking. But you are a bit of a boomer, though. To be fair.
I'm actually not. To be fair, I'm not old enough to be a boomer, but I'm getting that direction. I grant you. But I mean, honestly, we've wasted enough blood and treasure on Afghanistan. I don't care what happens to the damn place.
Sorry, what was the specific reporting about the women in Afghanistan?
The BBC has just got, I saw about 4 articles about these poor women in Afghanistan, feminist women who aren't going to get overrun by the Taliban. I don't care. Really don't care. I haven't got the slightest interest in it.
Right, okay. So they're saying that we should justify going back because they've taken down their pride flags. Right,
because there's no, LGBTQ crap there. We should go back there and get more soldiers killed. Fuck them. No, not one more. So many British fathers and sons and husbands have been killed and maimed in that shitty country. I do not care about it anymore. In fact, I think I was saying to the Albion before the stream started, one reason my son's serving in the Royal Navy and not the Army like the rest of my family, like myself and my father and grandfather, etc., is because even 10, 12 years ago, I knew Afghanistan was a waste of time and effort. It was obvious to anyone with half a working brain, and we've achieved absolutely nothing in Afghanistan in that 20 years, except wasting huge amounts of brave men's blood and British money.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, Baron Badger in the chat saying women's education in Afghanistan, Britain helped pay for it. Well, good luck to us. What a waste of money. Colonel Blimp says sons and daughters. I would point out, Colonel Blimp, that the number of women killed in Afghanistan was in the British forces was 2 or 3, because hardly any women served there, and most of them didn't serve in the front line. And I don't think women should be in any frontline military unit anyway, because they just make that military unit worse than it should otherwise be. And I'm really sick to death of keep hearing people saying, oh, the men and women of the British Armed Forces, it's the men that do most of the heavy lifting. And so it should be too, because they're better at it. one of the things we are going to move on to shortly is feminism and its deleterious effects on Western nations, and including, of course, Britain and Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and America even. So that's one of the things we're going to go on to in a minute. I will just ask the other guys on here, the guests, the Albion and Napoleon. I take it neither of you guys would be in favour of sending more British soldiers back to Afghanistan to save the women's, because I certainly am not.
No.
No. I don't think that it's a question that needs asking anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry, Colonel Blimp. I didn't realise you meant the series. That's fine, mate. I beg your pardon. I'm just amazed at how our media can just spin on a dime and save the women in Afghanistan, and somehow or other we should have all these third world barbarians in our country for some unknown reason. I just don't get it.
Well, yeah, it's going to line up nicely with Blair, reasserting himself into politics if we go and invade the Middle East again. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, let's go and mess around in sandpits for another 25 years. Why not? John McNamara, we started with the stuff in Plymouth and how it is being spun because it's a white bloke and not someone who is more diverse. We actually started on that, so it kind of came from that what we're talking about now. And of course, as we said, you might have missed it. All you're getting is calls for even more gun control in Britain, which is the least armed country in Europe, as far as I know. Of course, you're seeing it's being treated totally differently to if some diverse person had done the shooting. And you've got to look at the fact that young straight white men in Britain are at the bottom of the heap for everything and anything. They're not considered for anything. And as the Albion said to me before the stream started, it's straight white men who are constantly being told that we're horrible bastards, which of course is nonsense, given we did more to create civilization than any other group of human beings. But
well, this is the issue with the shooting. That what are we meant to talk about? We're not going to defend it because none of us want to, but providing any sort of explanation is just going to be conceived by others as a defense. So or are we just meant to sit here and say, yeah, it was bad for 20 minutes? There's just nothing to say. It was a tragedy, and let's move on.
Yeah. Mitch in the chat, I've just put it up on the screen here. I've heard that American troops had to turn a blind eye to Bati Bazaar pedophilia in Afghanistan so as not to piss off the locals. Yes, I've certainly heard of cases where that happened as well. You're not going to change Afghanistan. It's always been the same. It's always been a shell. And well before Christmas, in my opinion, it's going to be exactly the same as it was before the troops went in there. So every single person who was killed, maimed, and wounded there, that was for nothing. And the billions of pounds that Britain spent on that stupid and pointless war, all completely down the drain, wasted money. Will we learn anything from that? I don't know, man. I doubt it. But there we go.
I mean, you say wasted, but I think it served exactly the purpose that they wanted it to. It kept the public busy.
Yeah,
it gave a faux unity to the country, and it was essentially a television series for most of the public to rally behind. Served its purpose, and now it may be used for the same purpose again.
Yeah,
this isn't to sort of demean the people that went out there. I'm saying this is how it was being used.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, the soldiers and the Marines, etc., who went out there and fought, they were very brave, very good guys. They were doing their duty and trying to do their best. There were never enough of them in the country. Britain never had enough troops there to really make much of a difference anyway, even though we sent the second most troops of anyone after the USA. But it was all for now. I mean, you can just see as soon as the troops leave, it just goes back to how it was. So we achieved absolutely nothing in 20 years. And it's impossible for anyone to kid themselves that we did. The vast majority of Afghans seem to be quite happy being under the Taliban. Fine, let them be under the Taliban. And those few that are not, tough. Shit happens, as they say.
Well, even if they want to start armed conflict, if they don't like it, then whatever.
Yeah, I mean, let them fight back.
Crack on.
Yeah, there's plenty of firearms there. You know, there's loads of firearms in Afghanistan. But yeah, I just think, you know, they made their bed, let them lie in it. I don't care. We have such bigger problems. Again, this is from Mitch, which will kind of lead us on to one of the things we're going to talk about. The TikTok bitch on Twitter who said Jordan Peterson's to blame for the shooting in Plymouth. Now, how fucking ridiculous is that?
Sorry, I cut out for a moment then, but I've just read the message on screen, and yes.
Yeah. I mean, how ridiculous. I mean, if anyone is to blame for it, it's actually feminists. You know, I mean, if you really, really want to like start sticking pins in blame, I mean, I'd say partly government because they don't pay any attention to the mental health of white males, and then behind them, I would say feminists and feminism, which has alienated a lot of young men. I mean, I've got quite a lot of relatively speaking, a lot of very young blokes on my Discord who come on these streams, and you know, they can see the issues that are out there for young white men in Britain these days, and not just in Britain. The same thing is largely true in Australia. It's the same thing is true in Canada. The same thing's probably true in America. And it isn't, as Hal Stowe in the chat said, it's not Jordan Peterson's milk toast stuff that's got anything to do with this. It's a combination of feminism and globo homo, if you like.
Yeah, it's a deracination of the men in our culture, and you know, it's when you tell men that there is no greater purpose to life than sleeping about, getting pissed up, going to university to study something that you don't actually care about, to get a job that you don't care about, to earn money, to buy a house that you don't care about. You know, all of these things are just pumped into people's heads and are completely meaningless. And when people can't fit into that mold, you're surprised that there's issues come about.
I will say, Ozzy has made this comment that I put up on the chat, and no pity for that grumpkin, may God be just. Yeah, I've got no pity for him personally, and I think he was a vile, cowardly bugger for shooting those people. I mean, he killed a child, for God's sake, apart from anything else. So I've got no pity or sympathy for him in that sense. But like, if you're going to look at the root causes of what caused that stuff, you've got to look beyond his case in particular and look at other people. And for a long time now, straight white men have been at the bottom of the heap in Britain for anything. You know, they're the least and last considered of any people, and they are constantly attacked in the MSM as being evil, white superiority, guys with white privilege and all this nonsense, which is pure crap. And then on top of that, of course, you have all these lockdowns and all the rest of it, so that even if your meaning in life was going out and getting pissed and having casual sex, you can't even do that now sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. You know, there's nothing greater than that can be gained in life according to, you know, the sort of worldview that's being pushed. So when you're either physically unable to do that because you're under house arrest or because you're hideous, then what else? Are you surprised when people, you know, break?
Yeah.
You know, like you say, none of this is a defense. You know, it's just an explanation as to why this might have happened, and potentially a way of preventing it from happening again. Not that I think that anything that's mentioned is going to be changed, because a shooting here or there doesn't, you know, it's no concern of people that have the kind of vision that is causing this.
Yeah. Absolutely right. I mean, one of the things I wanted to discuss on this stream that we won't get onto yet, because I want to see if Adam's coming on a bit later. I wonder if he didn't realise we'd gone back to 9 p.m. again. One of the things we're going to discuss at some stage on this stream is that if you're going to have a nationalist policy of stopping mass immigration, that's not enough on its own, because you also have to do something about actually producing more people in your own indigenous people. And that requires being anti-feminist. It really does. I've always known that, and I think a lot of people do know it, but not everyone does. Yes, the guy was absolutely deranged. Yes, of course he was absolutely deranged, Holstow. We know this. We're not talking about him in particular. We're talking about people behind him, people who come from the same direction. Napoleon, you haven't said anything for a bit, mate. What are you talking about?
I don't know. There was a comment that was quite funny earlier that I wanted to bring up, but
go on. What was
it? I think Tom said it. What is it? Oh fuck! I went too far. Give me a minute. It's almost there. Oh yeah. How could they think a liberal democracy was possible in a country full of tribes and warlords? That's quite funny.
Oh yeah, they're talking about Afghanistan. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom, for that. Made my day.
Yeah. No, that's true. Absolutely, definitely true. Sorry, I'm just doing something in the Discord.
Just on Holstow in the chat, you might be right. There might be nothing behind it, but I don't think it is right. I think that he wasn't. I think that something caused this. I might be wrong about that. Maybe he was just born ready to pull the trigger, but I think that he went through a process that got him there.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ozzy's saying in the chat, victim mentality, is it gay? Are we victims, etc.? I'm not suggesting we are victims, but I think in order not to be, straight white guys have to stand up for themselves a bit more. You know, we shouldn't just sit there and take it when these people come up with white privilege and all this other absolute bullshit that they come out with all the time. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we adopt a victim mentality, but we should certainly stand up for ourselves. No, I don't understand him, Patriotic Archive, either. And I don't understand him. I don't understand anyone who would go and kill a child. Don't at all. All right. But there is stuff behind it that is possibly important, and there will be a lot of people out there who are not evil bastards, who are not absolutely mentally deranged and who wouldn't go and shoot people, but will also be suffering. And I think it's those people we're talking about.
What are we, victims? I mean, technically yes, but if you want to be a massive, like talking about what are we victims? I don't know. Like, do you mean in general, or like do you want to just ignore the fact that we are? I don't understand you, Ozzy. You're gonna have to be more specific.
No, I do agree. As he said, victim mentality is gay. I agree. Like I said earlier, oh, sorry.
My gun is cold. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Sorry.
Were you just having a little sing there?
I thought I was interrupting you and realised you're just having a sing song.
Sorry. Go on.
No, I don't think that for 1 moment that people should be trying to wear a veneer of look at me, I'm the victim, because a victim mentality or a victim narrative only works when the people that are able to provide power actually facilitate that. You know, we can sit here all day and say that, oh, look at how bad everything is, look at how mistreated we are, but we're not going to garner any sympathy. Not only are we not going to garner sympathy, it's not a good mental state to be in, because you're not productive. You're relying on a higher echelon of power to be the ones to give you the solution. So no, I don't think we should be having a victim mentality at all. Like I say, all we're doing is spitballing ideas as to why it might have happened. Maybe you're right, and evil is just evil, and this was inevitably going to happen because of his makeup or his moral, his immorality. I don't know, but I do think that sometimes there can be more to garner from stuff like this than just it was an act of evil, and we don't need to look into it further. But I'm not for 1 minute saying that we need to say, woe is me, life is so hard as a white man. That's not going to get anyone anywhere.
No, I'm not suggesting we do that, but I think we should recognise that there are a lot of young men out there at the moment who feel quite detached from modern British society.
Yes, yeah, but I think what differentiates it is that a victim narrative doesn't give you the ability to move on and forge solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can understand the situation that you're in, even if it's a dire situation. You need to be honest with it, but then understanding it, you can then move on and take the appropriate steps to combat it. A victim narrative is one that is purely used as a defense against taking action yourself.
Yeah. Napoleon, anything to add to that?
I don't really. Well, I should probably say this first. I don't really like making generalizations, which is why I'm not saying whether or not acknowledging your victimhood is good or bad. I guess it depends upon the specific circumstance. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's an excuse. Yeah, I guess it's just down to the individual whether or not you do. So yeah, I guess that's my take.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I think this is quite interesting. Halstow is saying, I mean, if you watch the interview, the interview of Priti Patel, I think he means, the journalist literally asked, what are you doing to combat against right-wing terrorism? Well, I mean, the obvious retort to that is, what right-wing terrorism? There isn't any. There literally is no right-wing terrorism in Britain. Right, in fact, there's hardly any right-wing terrorism all around the world, but there's none at all in Britain. I mean, can anyone think of any? I mean, this guy obviously wasn't a terrorist. He was a nutcase, but he wasn't a terrorist. He didn't have a political opinion. Halstow is saying they're labeling this as right-wing terrorism. Why? He wasn't, as far as I know, he wasn't connected to any political group.
Because incels hate women and only right-wingers hate women. That is the through line.
Right.
I would imagine.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, but I mean, okay. I mean, incels. What can you say about incels? I mean, incels are strange because they're a self-labeled group, aren't they? Mm-hmm. I mean, no one's an incel who doesn't call themselves an incel.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think this goes to the discussion of the victim narrative, because once you've assumed identity, you might be, by definition, involuntarily celibate for, up until the age of 25. But if you don't consider yourself an incel, then you can still do things to change that. But once you've assumed the title, then you're sort of owning the issues and not doing anything to change them.
Yeah, I mean, look, okay, there's a lot of comments in the chat that we need to look at. Mitch is saying, I don't know how much of this is true, by the way. I doubt very much of it's true, because most of it's coming from the NSM, and they wouldn't know the truth if it was a wet fish and slapped them repeatedly around the face. Mitch is saying he was pro-Trump and part of a libertarian party. Now, Trump, of course, was basically a 1980s Democrat. And the Libertarian Party, in my opinion, are basically fairly left-wing. But, you know, I guess, if that's what they're saying. And the BBC said he was part of a far-right online group. What far-right online group might that be, I wonder?
That was probably an edgy Discord group, let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's anything at all.
Yeah, if there's anything at all, which is quite likely not, you know. I mean, I just don't believe it. But, you know, as I said earlier, had this been a diverse person who'd done exactly the same thing, there wouldn't be any talk of, oh, he was a radical Muslim. There might have been talk of, oh, he was mentally ill, because that's always what they come out with. But, you know, you've got to look at the way the media shapes this stuff. They don't give you the facts. They shape the facts the way they want them to be seen.
Someone has just mentioned something else as well that would be why they're referring to it as right-wing terrorism. I did see a clip of him using the term black-pilled, referring to himself as being black-pilled and how everyone else is going to get black-pilled. So, you know, this is also another reason as to why they're going to be labeling him right-wing.
And they were saying he watched Black Pigeon content. Well, if he watched Black Pigeon Speaks is entirely milk toast, and he's certainly not even all that right wing. It's just nonsense. But I mean, black-pilled, yeah, okay. Well, a lot of people are getting black-pilled. A lot of people are getting black-pilled, and you don't have to be an incel to be black-pilled about the way modern Western society is going. You know, you really don't. It's really strange. I agree with what Son O'Hamar is saying here. The media is not retarded. They know what they're doing. They're a propaganda machine. Truth has nothing to do with it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's totally true. Totally true. But I mean, if you watch Black Pigeon Speaks is a very milquetoast video maker. You know, and he really is. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've seen him, but isn't he just like an ethnic that lives in Japan?
He's not even. I wouldn't even say he was an ethnic. He lives in Japan certainly, but I wouldn't say he was an ethnic particularly.
I don't know. It's been a long time.
This guy in the chat needs to shut the fuck up.
Who are you talking about? Are you talking about Mango?
No, Tom. He said that he was clearly a schizo. He referred to himself as a Terminator before the shooting.
Okay, right. Well, yeah, fair enough. I don't know, guys. I mean, like I said, the stuff that the media calls far right these days is just ludicrous. It really is. It really is ridiculous. Hal Stowey's still on YouTube. Yeah, he's still on YouTube because he makes milquetoast content. But yeah.
Are they? Sorry, Halster. Are you referring to the shooter, or are you referring to?
No, he's talking. He's talking about Black Pigeon Speaks. I suspect. I'm not joking. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, fair enough. I mean, that may be all true. Look, I mean, the only advice I can give to young blokes is like, don't sit in your room playing computer games all the time. You know, when you're allowed out, of course, you're not always allowed out because of lockdowns. And I think the British people in particular are going to find those lockdowns coming back come the autumn. But when you are allowed outside of your home, don't sit in your home playing computer games. You know, get outside with your mates, go and have a beer, chase a few young ladies, and maybe join some local groups so you can do some stuff which is healthy, you know, hobbies of various descriptions, this kind of stuff. Sitting in your room, calling yourself an incel and saying, oh, no woman will even look at me is kind of like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, basically. It's like everybody, any bloke can smarten himself up and get out there, you know? And not all women are oil paintings either. So if you're not an oil painting, there will certainly be women out there who will find you interesting if you're reasonably smart and clean.
Sorry,
smart and clean.
Sorry, I just read simple pirates comment.
Mhm.
We're not allowed out. They turned us all into children. It is a bit like being grounded for a year and a half.
Yeah. I mean, tell me about it. I'm in a lockdown where I am at the moment. This is the 6th one we've had. Yeah. I mean, all right, I tend to ignore it as much as I can. But if I went more than 5 kilometers from where I live, I could literally face thousands of dollars of fines if I was caught doing that. It's absolutely ridiculous. It really is. But, and this is for something which has got about a 99% survival rate. And it's not all that dangerous unless you're over 80 years old, already extremely sick.
Are we still talking about being an incel?
No, we're talking about how the lockdowns have kind of made the incel thing worse.
I don't think incels have a survivable rate of 99%.
No, that was the China virus I was talking about there. But no, I mean, the point is that the lockdowns have made these people worse because, it's given them an excuse not to leave their room, if that makes any sense. Does that make sense, guys?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
John McNamara, here we go. Here's a question that I can.
Yeah, I was just reading that.
Yeah. Would you date a woman if she had taken the vax if you were in your 20s? Yeah, I would date her. Why not?
You've got incredibly slim pickings if you decide not to.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think women in their 20s who take it are very foolish because it has been shown that it collects in women's ovaries. I think they're extremely foolish. I think they're even more foolish than young blokes who take it, to be honest with you. But would I date a woman who'd taken it? Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, presumably she's going to be no worse to anyone else than anybody else. I don't think she can give you the vaccine.
Wait. What?
So, what are we looking at here?
Alienation, over-sexualization, split families, and shit jobs. That is yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That's it,
families.
really.
Yeah, families have definitely been split apart for sure.
Almost all problems start at the family.
Well, yeah, but also the lack of family is also, I think, part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there are so many single mothers in the UK these days. I don't think that's at all healthy for young. I don't think that's at all healthy for young men. I mean, I don't think even a good single mother, and not all of them are good, of course, but I don't think even a good single mother can replace having a father for a son, because as a boy, you tend to emulate your father. He's the bloke you copy. He's the bloke who teaches you to be a man, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, I have this account followed on Instagram, and it's like it's a kind of like a left-wing kind of account, but it does like a lot of data collection. And one of the posts on there recently was on the statistical difference between single mothers and parents, people who grew up with two parents in the household. And there was, I think it was down to a really poor sample, but they basically found no statistical difference between the two. What's the technical word for it? But between the
two types of families.
No, there's a really that, but there's a really technical word for it that I'm forgetting.
And they were saying there was no statistical difference between families with no fathers and families with fathers, were there?
Yeah, but that's absolute bullshit.
Yeah, I'd say that
too. Because I found I think 3 articles on Sci-Hub that have no bias and actually have good samples, and they weren't that much difference. For those who don't know, I have a stutter, so it's going to be a bit.
That's all
hard,
right, mate. Don't worry. We understand. No worries at all.
You know, yeah. One of them had a pretty big difference. The other two are marginal, so I wasn't interested in them as much as I were for the last one. But I think that you should know instinctively that families with only one parent are pretty shit anyways.
Yeah, I don't think we need studies to prove this. They can be beneficial for the people of a certain mindset, but honestly, do people need to have a peer-reviewed paper saying that it's better to have two parents in a household than one? I just think a lot of this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like common sense. I agree with you there, the Albion, absolutely true. But I mean, as Ozzy said in the chat here, fathers are not only important to sons; they're also important for girls, because women with fathers tend to make better relationship choices. They probably understand men a bit better because they have a dad, and most dads are pretty protective of their daughters also. I mean, I certainly remember when I was a young man, the first time you met your girlfriend's father, that was a bloody big deal. You were always shit scared. And on your absolute best behavior, So again, yeah, I totally agree, Ozzy. I mean, fathers are important for daughters as well. I mean, fathers are important, We're not told that anymore because, and that's a feminist narrative, of course. As with so much which is evil in modern society, it's a feminist narrative. Black Lives Matter want to abolish families. I'm sure they do, because they're a Marxist organization, and Marxists don't like families. They never have.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might come from slightly different places as to why, but certainly at the moment, anything that is any relationship. A relationship isn't quantifiable and it's not material. So breaking that down as much as possible and making people rely purely on goods as a source of pleasure is, I think, a large part of why it's being pushed so much now.
Yeah, I mean, Mango is correct. Marxists don't like generational wealth that stays within families, but they also don't like the fact that families are the smallest possible independent unit.
That's the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, a nuclear family with a mother and father is rather independent of government, and they don't like that.
Yeah. You can have family traditions that don't extend outside of that unit, which is just not acceptable in the mindset of either the Marxists or whatever you want to consider us to be living through now. You have to be broken down on the individual level so that you can have individualized indoctrination.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't understand what you're saying here, Natman Prime. That's when boomers become fathers. What's when boomers become fathers? You'll have to make more clear what you're talking about here, because I don't get it. Sono's Hammer, they like nothing that is healthy. Yeah, but that's quite true. They don't. They want us to be all individualized in our little pods, eating our fake meat or our bugs, not being able to travel very far, and just basically doing as we're told. And and if they can introduce a social credit system and a cashless society, all of which they're pushing towards at the moment, all of them they are pushing towards, and probably UBI as well, universal basic income. They'll have us as 21st century serfs if they can get that way. I think.
And the worst part is, most people will like it.
I don't know if most people will like it, but I think a lot of people will put up with it for sure. Yeah.
You give everyone their Netflix and their Doritos, most people will like it because they're so broken down.
I don't even understand how people can watch Netflix. I'll be quite honest with you, I don't. Like the left-wing bollocks, which is 99% of Netflix productions, I just don't understand how people can watch it. Sorry, carry on there, the Alvin.
Well, it's because it's just it's like candy floss of art. Instead of having something of artistic value and appreciating it and revisiting it, it's just churn this film paste out onto Netflix so that people can consume it and forget about it the next day. And they can sit on their sofas watching Netflix until they die, and a lot of people will be content with that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. What do you say for that one, Napoleon?
Sorry, what?
Do you think that most people are just happy with this couch potato existence where you're not allowed out and you're just watching Netflix and playing increasingly crap computer games?
Do I think most people? Yeah, I think a lot of people are, because people are lazy nowadays and don't give a shit. So yeah, I think that's my take. Sorry, I completely forgot I was on here. I think a poll I saw a month ago showed that it was neutral. Most people are neutral, so I don't think they really gave a shit.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, not the majority, but a lot of people were pretty pissed.
It's funny because I remember when the lockdown first started, and you had people going on furlough and families going out and spending time together. There was a strain of hope in people that maybe by having the families at home and that maybe it would be a push in the other direction where people will realize what they've missed out on, and there'll be a rebonding of the family and an invigoration of people not putting work first and maybe prioritizing the family. But I think that idea is long since gone.
Nutman Prime says fathers stopped being appreciated at the same time that boomers became fathers in the 70s and 80s onwards. Well, that might be true, but I don't think it's got anything to do with the boomers themselves, or certainly not the boomer dads. The boomer mums to some degree, yeah. But I mean, you don't have to be you don't have to be a genius to see that, like, the real rot in the West set in from the second half of the 1960s onwards. And it coincided with the contraceptive pill that was shortly followed by no-fault divorce and abortion on demand and all that stuff, all of which is basically the real basics of feminism these days, and has been for ages. And I think people nowadays forget that, people sometimes turn around and say, oh, third wave feminism's terrible, but second wave feminism was all right. But actually it wasn't. Loads of those women who were involved in the second wave feminism were, there were loads of like militant lesbians and people like that amongst them. They weren't healthy even then.
Stephen James, that was an awful joke, but I appreciate it.
Stephen James, where I broke up playing video games. Fallout 4. He who would pun would pick a pocket. There we go. It has been all downriver since the 1960s so-called revolution. Yes, it has. Absolutely. I remember thinking in the 1980s that maybe things would settle down because lots of those hippie dippies and all the rest of it from the 60s actually turned into seemingly respectable people. But of course, all the bad shit was still going on under the surface, including the so-called long march through the institutions and all this sort of shit. That was all going on underneath the surface. And it hasn't stopped. So, yeah. And here we are today, a situation. We're in this absolute crown world that we live in at the moment, where how can I describe it? You've got the government that is pushing to destroy most of the good things about Britain that's left, and there's only a few that are left, in my opinion, sadly. You've got feminism, which is pushing to destroy it, and you've got the left that is pushing to destroy it, and globo homo. It's like, we're surrounded by, Genghis Khan's got nothing on it apart from the piles of skulls. It's really crazy, to be honest with you. Should never have given women the vote. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. But, a bit late now. I don't think we can take it back, sadly. Ozzy, I like this guy that Ozzy's talking about here. Biology, cultural ideology by Coltrane should be compulsory. Coltrane's a very, very intelligent Australian bloke. He's a MGTOW fellow. He's a men going their own way fellow, but a sensible one, not an idiot. But he's very intelligent. I don't always agree with him on some things. Like, for example, he doesn't think that stay-at-home housewives bring much to the table in terms of whether they're worth the amount of money that you have to spend to have a stay-at-home housewife. I don't actually agree with that. I think that if you've got children, having a woman at home is actually absolutely worth it. But in most respects, yeah, Coltrane's excellent, and he is... some of his deep dive videos are definitely well worth looking into on YouTube for sure. So yeah, I certainly think that's true. Let me see. What else have we got on here at the moment? Yeah, listen, I was listening to this probably today, actually, on AA stream with Apostolic Majesty. The rot setting around the 1660s. I'm not too sure about that one, man. I'm not. I see it. I especially see it from Catholics, I have to say. But I'm not absolutely certain about that one. If you pick the date for the original sin of Britain, I would say joining World War I in 1914, and especially then in raising a mass army, which is something Britain had never historically done. I think that's the original sin of Britain was 1914. I think any time up until then, things were definitely savable for Britain. After that, much, much more difficult. I mean, Britain went into World War I as the richest nation in the world. They were the bankers for the world. And they came out of it debtors to the USA. I mean, all right, the French and the Italians and the Belgians and other people owed us money, which they defaulted on. And we defaulted on some of the debt that we owed to America after World War I. But, that's neither here nor there. Hadn't got involved in the war. Certainly, if we hadn't raised a huge land army, not only would millions of British and Empire guys not have been killed, and when I say Empire, I'm principally talking about Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders, and also South Africans. But not only would millions of guys not have got killed, like Britain would still have been a very wealthy nation in 1918. If Britain hadn't got involved, my guess is that Germany would have beaten France in 1915, and I don't think that would have been any skin off Britain's nose whatsoever, quite honestly. I think the French might have lost some colonies to the Germans. Who cares?
I agree that World War I is kind of one of the cornerstones in Britain's downfall. I think there is a constant desire to push the start date backwards, because, and that might be because it's accurate, but I think some people want, they want to say, well, Britain's downfall was really in 1066, and then someone else will come in and say, well, no, Britain's downfall was 3000 BC. There does seem to be a desire to always be pushing the date backwards, but I think World War I is definitively the crossing the Rubicon.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I think the main dates I see people talking about are in the 1500s when Henry VIII broke with Rome, and then I see the late 1600s, the so-called Glorious Revolution, when William of Orange became king. Because Britain didn't want a Catholic king, basically. I can't actually agree with either of those, to be honest. I see why people say them, but I can't really agree with them. But I do think, like, you can set aside that stuff, and you can, even if you think, okay, that was a bad turn, the real thing that started the unraveling of Britain and the British Empire was World War One, without any doubt whatsoever. And the excuses that people come up with for Britain joining it, I just don't buy. I mean, people talk about German naval rivalry, but the Royal Navy and the very efficient British shipyards had decisively outbuilt the German Navy by 1914. And the situation of the Germans just got worse as World War One went on, in terms of like how many Royal Navy ships there were compared to how many German ships. So that's not true. I think Britain's sensible policy in 1914 would have been to have an armed neutrality in the North Sea and the Channel to keep the German high seas fleet in the Baltic. And we should have just said, look, stay in the Baltic, we're not doing anything, but if you come out, it will sink you. But I wouldn't have sent a British army to France, and I most certainly wouldn't have raised a mass land army like Britain did. And I think those things were like the real turning points in British history. I don't know. What Napoleon, the Albion, what do you think about that stuff?
Like I
said I was.
Carry on,
oh no! You can go.
I wasn't really going to add anything. I was just going to say, I agree. I think that for a long time now, it's World War One has been cemented as the cause of the death of Europe.
Napoleon?
Sorry, what was the question?
Do you agree that World War One was like the real ripping point, the original sin of the Britain and the Empire?
That's a really hard question. Sorry, I said I was going far to piss, but I went to my freezer and I got a calypso. I've got no idea what the conversation was about.
It's all right, man. Don't worry. Look, John McNamara, I'll come back to the Battle of Jutland in a second. Mango's saying, is this the gift of retrospect, though? Well, yeah, you can say it's hindsight, but there's a reason these streams are called Splendid Isolation. And Splendid Isolation was the period between from the 1870s up until certainly 1902, but really 1904, when Britain had no permanent treaties with anyone, because we just relied on a Royal Navy, which was more than twice as strong as the next two navies combined, to keep us safe. We had a relatively small professional army, which could deal with stuff around the British Empire and defend the British Isles if necessary. But we basically relied on the Royal Navy, and that period was known as Splendid Isolation. And it was broken by the Liberal Party, particularly idiots like the Foreign Secretary Grey. I call him an idiot, but actually I think he was quite evil in many respects, who deliberately tied Britain in first with France and then with Russia, into ententes, the entente cordiale from 1904, and then another one with Russia a couple of years later, which were effectively treaties of alliance that we couldn't really back out on. And Sir Edward Grey tied us into those things deliberately, and that's why we ended up joining the First World War. Now, okay, the fact that the Germans invaded Belgium was used as an excuse, but Britain wasn't the only country guaranteeing Belgian neutrality. Germany was another one. France was another one. So Britain didn't have to go to war for that. Germany just ignored it. France just ignored it. So why shouldn't Britain have? It was just an excuse. We were tied in with the French and Russians by the ententes, and that was a Liberal Party thing done on purpose. And of course, who was the First Lord of the Admiralty at that time? It was Winston Churchill, who had crossed the floor from the Conservative Party and joined the Liberals, and was an absolute warmonger against Germany in the First World War. And I'm by no means as anti-Churchill as some people are, but I'm not a big fan. I have to say, I'm not. I don't think he was a very good First Lord of the Admiralty either, which is the political head of the Navy. Although he tried to give tactical instructions to people who knew much more than he did. And I think that was the big British mistake. The only treaty Britain signed in that period that I think was a good treaty was the Anglo-Japanese Naval Alliance in 1902. And that was a good treaty for the simple reason that it didn't call on Japan or Britain to go to each other's aid when they were fighting one other country. So because Japan ended up fighting Russia in 1904, Britain didn't have to get involved in that war. You only had to join if more than one country was fighting you. So had France declared war on Japan, then Britain would have had to have joined to help Japan. And the French and Russians would have got sunk even more badly than the Russians did. But because the French Navy was certainly no match for the Royal Navy in those days. No Navy was then. So that was a pretty good treaty. But the ententes with France and Russia, Britain gained nothing from them. I mean, look at the First World War. And you sometimes hear the perfidious Anglo merchants coming out with, oh, Britain wanted the First World War and all the rest of it. Well, some people in Britain probably did, some like elites. But if you look at what happened to Britain in 1918 and 1919, Britain gained nothing worthwhile from the First World War at all. I mean, okay, we gained a few territories in the desert in the Middle East, big deal. But really, it was pointless. We gained nothing from it, and we lost a huge amount of stuff, not least the British people's belief in themselves. And also, it was the beginning of the end of the church in England because of the huge losses on the Western Front. I think that was a kick in the guts for a religion. If you want to look why Christianity started dying in Britain, look at the losses in the First World War. People, it started to give people huge doubts because so many people were killed and maimed. I mean, we were talking earlier about 600 blokes killed over 25 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. That is appalling and a huge and terrible loss. But that number of people would get killed in a skirmish on the Western Front in World War I. In a day, an hour even. We just have no idea about that sort of thing these days. So that's why I say that the turning point for Britain, the original sin of Britain and the British Empire was joining the war in 1914, and especially in raising a mass army, which was against all British tradition. We'd never ever done that before. So that's my monologue on that bit. The Albion, you got anything to add to that, mate?
Yeah, just on that last point, I agree. I think that a lot of the cultural changes that we see in the 20s and up until now lately is a sort of post hoc justification, trying to rationalize why we lost so much life. Most of culture seems to be a response to just the utter destruction of everything we previously knew from the postmodern schools to the sort of 20s esoteric philosophies that started coming out that was tried to get a spiritual understanding that wasn't a Christian understanding. All of these things came as a response, I think, in part as because of just the vast loss of life, people trying to understand it, people trying to come to terms with just how many countrymen they've lost.
Yeah, I mean, there were villages that lost most of their men. There were neighborhoods in cities, in industrial towns. Excuse me a second.
Yeah, and something that saddens me just to think about is how much knowledge passed down in small communities was lost because of that loss of life.
Yeah, and I mean, it was made worse because so many guys volunteered. Entire football teams would join up, bloody church army places, ex-Boy Scouts. They would all go and join up together, and then they'd all get mown down by machine guns and German artillery in no man's land. It's yeah, I don't know, man. I just think you can trace so much of the evils that have happened in Britain to joining that stupid war. And when you watch people trying to make excuses for why we joined it today, none of them are convincing to me. None of them. People say, oh, Germany would have been a hegemon over Europe. No, they wouldn't have done. Well, how would they have been a hegemon over Europe? Were they going to occupy France forever? I don't think so. Sorry, carry on.
Well, people try and use Germany as the boogeyman in World War II just because they know of the cultural power Germany holds in World War II. They try and use them as the boogeyman in World War I because they know the power they hold in World War II. So that's the only reason that comes about, I think.
I mean, the Kaiser, I don't think was the brightest tool in the shed, but he certainly wasn't the Austrian painter, No such thing at all. No such thing at all. So I think the only thing that would have happened is that France would have ended up having to pay a huge indemnity, just like they did in 1870-71 in the Franco-Prussian War. And they would have probably lost some colonies to Germany. Well, tough on France. How does that affect Britain? I just don't understand that. I mean, the only people who gained from World War I were France. They got Alsace and Lorraine back, which they'd lost in 1870-71. And their crappy desert empire got a bit bigger. They took a load of money off the Germans. They were the only people who gained. Oh, and the other people who gained from World War I were the Americans, who only joined it in 1917. And most of their troops didn't even get to fight. Britain gained nothing from World War I. It was absolute waste of time. And we were taken into it by the Liberal Party, and I think people forget this. And as I say, there's a reason these streams are called Splendid Isolation, and they're called Splendid Isolation because of that period under largely, but not totally, conservative rule, when Britain and genuine conservative rule, not Alexander Johnson, green, Labourish rule, which is what we have now. But Britain was a genuinely independent nation that didn't have alliances with other people and just relied on an extremely strong navy to stay safe and to look after British trade and to look after the British merchant fleet, which was about 70% of all the merchant ships in the world at the time.
We've got a couple of people asking in the chat what you think the actual cause of World War I was.
It depends what you're talking about. If you're looking at the actual cause, you can say it was miscalculations because Austria thought they could fight a short war against Serbia and just do that. But then the Russians decided they were going to support the Serbs. And because the Russians were going to support the Serbs, that meant the Germans had to support the Austrians. And that meant the French were going to support the Russians. And because of these ridiculous intentes that Grey had got us involved with, that meant Britain was going to get involved. So if you could look at it that way, I don't believe Duarte fan is saying the Balfour Agreement and Israel. Nah, sorry, man, that was not a big enough deal to cause World War I, in my opinion. No, it wasn't. I think it was a mistake. I don't think Balfour should have gone for that. But I don't think that was the actual cause of World War I or anything like it, because you've got to look at what was going on in Central Europe really to see what caused World War I. But as I said, Britain could have easily stayed out of it, and in my humble opinion, most certainly should have. Biggest mistake we ever made was getting involved in it. And if World War I doesn't drag out to 4 years with enormous casualties on all sides, and it finishes in 1915, and I think without Britain and the Empire, France would have lost in 1915 without any doubt whatsoever. Then you don't get World War II, and you don't get the Austrian painter, and you maybe don't even get the Russian Revolution. You might have, but you might not have. There's so many things that might not have happened if you don't have a 4-year World War I. I don't think it would have all been over by Christmas. Eva Doberman in the chat. I think Germany would have beaten France at some stage in 1915. Absolutely. On their own? Yes, I'm sure they would have. But yeah, and Natman Prime, you're quite right. I mean, it's not just Britain joining the war. It's Britain going against all of its previous military and naval traditions and raising a mass army. We'd never done that before. I don't know why we did. You know, why did nearly 1 million British and Empire soldiers have to die for France? Doesn't
Yeah,
make
there's
any
another
sense
good.
to me.
There's another good point about World War II in Ireland. If we didn't have our hands tied.
Oh yeah, John McNamara. Yeah, absolutely. This is another good point. Absolutely, you could well be right there too. You might well have had some form of home rule in Ireland, and you might then have not had the breakup of the British Isles. Yeah, perfectly possible. But yeah, as I say, I mean, that's my opinion on that one. Someone asked me earlier about Jutland, and I'm not going to go into great depth about this because this is not an historical stream. What I would say is this. At Jutland, the Germans ran into the Grand Fleet, the German High Seas Fleet ran into the British Royal Navy Grand Fleet twice and were nearly destroyed on both occasions. And they just about managed to escape and scuttle back to port, and they never came out again in strength because they knew damn well they were very lucky not to have lost their entire fleet. Were the German ships pretty good? Yes, they were. Did some too thinly armoured British battle cruisers blow up? Yes, they did. But the German fleet was really lucky to survive that. They came within an inch of being totally destroyed. And the Germans knew it, which is why they never came out in force again. So that's my really short take on Jutland. I might actually do a video on Jutland at some stage. I mean, there are good videos out there that you can find. I'm not spinning a story, Simple Pirate. I'm just telling the historical truth. But there we go. That's that one. Now, gents, I don't think we're going to get anyone else joining us at this stage. I'll be surprised. Adam's probably fallen asleep, or he's working, or something like that. So I think we can go on to what I was going to talk about earlier, which was that article that was in the Discord, the Albion, which I will put up in the chat for anyone who wants it. So go and have a check it out. Here we are.
Oh, the article. Yep.
Yeah, this is the one from the Affirmative Right website, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Now, I'll put it in the chat for anyone who wants to go and look at it. This is an article from the Affirmative Right website by Colin Liddell, who I've had on stream a couple of times, and I hope to have on the stream again fairly shortly. For anyone who missed it, I had the Franklin on the other day, by the way, who's an extremely good Australian YouTuber. But anyway, this is an article by Colin Liddell, and it's called Voting with Their Ovaries, and I'm just going to go through it, and maybe the Albion and Napoleon can add their comments into it. It's a little bit related to what we were talking about earlier, because look, to summarize it, what he's talking about is it's no good just stopping mass immigration into the UK. You've also got to start actually breeding real indigenous British people as well, which means you've really got to change one of the basic things about feminism. So anyway, here we go. Voting with Their Ovaries by Colin Liddell. Not all voting goes through a ballot box. You know this because you are already aware of the phrase voting with their feet. People express what they want in a number of ways, and of course it's well known that democracy in the West isn't really that democratic, so people find other ways to vote. For example, one of the main complaints that the nationalist right raises against its opponents and mass immigration is the lack of real democracy, often expressed in the phrase, "we were never asked." Mass immigration, we were never asked. Racial replacement, we were never asked, etc., etc. This sounds rather weak because it unwittingly highlights the weakness of nationalist sentiment, but it also ignores the fact that actually white Western populations and populations in the developed world generally have actually been voting with their ovaries for some time for mass immigration and racial replacement. Yes, for several decades now, the fertility rate for populations in the developed world has been around 1.4 or 1.5 mark. Where this is higher is usually due to more fertile recent immigrants. demanding the end of mass immigration in the society that is actively involved in depopulating itself by around a quarter or a third every generation is, to use the phrase, simply pissing in the wind. None of our advanced capitalist economies is going to do very well on that kind of birth rate without immigration. That's just a brutal fact, and one that so many on the dissident right are hiding under the bedclothes from. Here's a typical well-intentioned nationalist on Twitter clutching his pearls at the latest spate of puff pieces promoting mass immigration in Canada. No, we never voted for that, because if we had been asked, our answer would have been no. Fun fact, our Conservative Party, in inverted commas, loves the Great Replacement just as much as the Liberals, only they want it to be done orderly and by the rules. And of course, that's true of the British Conservative Party as well. Connected to this, links on a Twitter thread, Canada needs to get 100 million people by 2100, says BlackRock's Wiseman. It also contains the golden quote, it's actually not about immigration, it's about population growth. Searching the report behind the story turns up this illuminating graph, which you can go and have a look at if you follow the link. So that's the first half of the article. Have you guys got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't know if you wanted to finish it before we discuss it.
No, we'll go to the other half in a minute. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my voice.
Yeah, reading through the article, I mean, for the most part, I agree with what he's saying, but there's a couple of times where I do think that he's a little bit too fatalistic in what would happen if there isn't a maintaining the increase of population growth that we currently have through immigration. You know, obviously things would change, but there's a large amount of automation happening, and I don't necessarily think that a growing population is a necessity. You know, this isn't to say that incentivizing higher birth rates isn't a good idea. It's just that I think that even if it doesn't happen, he seems to think that we'll come up to the scenario that he presents that he believes the economy would go through if we don't increase birth rates. But I don't think that it's a certainty that we would have a failing economy if we don't keep up the increase in population.
You got anything to add to that one, Napoleon?
To be honest, about the fertility thing, I guess so. I guess like there are lots of ways to encourage people to have more children, you know, like tax incentives, things like that, individual responsibilities, and pressuring people into having them, I guess, by changing social dynamics, which you can do through policy. But you'd have to have like a complete majority government control, which we don't have because we're not represented by anyone. So yeah, it is quite far off.
I totally agree with that.
And obviously, it's a sort of action through inaction that he's arguing with the fertility issue. But it's not just necessarily state-imposed financial incentives that you can provide to people to incentivize native birth rates. You know, I think one of the big causes for this is the dramatic decrease in infant mortality. I suspect this is a large reason as to why developed nations stop having as many children, because you know, we go from a 50% survival rate to I think it's almost 95% survival rate. You know, this is obviously going to disincentivize having large amounts of children, because you feel more secure in knowing that the children that you rear are actually going to make it to adulthood.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the amount of increase that you need is not as big as people think. You know, you're not saying, like, my father came from a family where there were 7 kids. No one is suggesting we need to go back to that. But you have to have 2 or 3 in order to not in order to not shrink. It's just as simple as that.
Well, this is kind of my contention, is that I don't necessarily think that it's going to be as negative as he says without if it does shrink. I think that a controlled shrinking of the population isn't necessarily going to cause any economic problems. There'll be changes.
No, I agree. I don't know about no problems, but I think that they probably wouldn't be as big as some people think. Yeah.
Exactly, and actually, Ozzy just moved on to the next point I wanted to make. That the article doesn't really address as much as I think it would be valuable to do so. Is that it's not that we need to necessarily increase the birth rates from 1 child to 3 children. It's that a vast majority of people don't want children at all. So this is really the crux of the issue, I think.
Yeah, I think you could even like narrow it down to that a bit more. I think you could say there's a lot of women who don't want children at all.
Yeah.
I think that's even more true than men, to be honest with you. I think like a lot of guys
certainly,
yeah. I think it's a lot of it is women who don't want kids, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Or if it's not that they don't explicitly want them, they value other things before children, and by the time they get to considering children, they're in their 40s.
Yeah,
and they're not actually with a man, and it's just not feasible,
Yeah. And then they'll say, "Where have all the good men gone?"
Exactly. Yeah. Why does no one want me?
Yeah.
I've got my own house. Why does no one want me? Well, it's because you're in your 40s and your biological clock is running out.
And you've been riding the cock carousel for the last 30 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, man. Okay, let's get on to the second and last bit of this article. I might divide this into 2 bits, but we'll see. The case being made is strictly an economic one, as usual, without frantically and parasitically sucking in population from the demographically healthier parts of the world. Canada, like all other developed countries, faces catastrophe. In fact, preventing mass immigration is essentially a gun pointed at the head of such nations, or economic zones as they should now be called. I think that's part of the problem, by the way. In a zero immigration, low fertility scenario, rents would initially fall and wages would rise. Yes, they certainly would. But then there would be an enormous rise in taxes to care for the old people. I don't know. We seem to have killed off a lot of our very old people recently.
This is the contention I have, which we can address. We can talk about it afterwards, but I don't think that's a necessity.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had 1 or 2 points to bring up about that myself. So yeah, in a zero immigration, where are we? To care for the old people, accompanied by massive business failures, which would then lead to wages to fall back again, while taxes rose even higher to A, either artificially boost employment, or B, pay for all the unemployed. Again, I don't totally agree with that. We can quibble about the exact details, but suffice to say, our debt-fueled, turbocharged economies would almost certainly hit a wall pretty hard. Personally, as a nationalist, I would be happy to take the economic hit that shutting down mass immigration would bring, and to live through the chaos and hard times. After all, chaos and hard times have their upsides too, which they do. If Western society stayed the course by blocking and then continuing to block mass immigration, they would probably be able to avoid the dreaded minoritization points of their core populations. Countries like Britain, Canada, America, etc., are all going to be white minority nations within the next few years. Which are only a few decades away. But yes, economically, it would be tough and ugly. The sad truth, however, is that most voters, even those who are in theory or in sentiment opposed to mass immigration, would not willingly take that hit. In fact, they would squeal like stuck pigs. The brutal fact that nationalists have to square up to is that most people in their dysfunctional democracies have actually been voting for mass immigration and racial replacement with their ovaries for decades, and will continue to do so with their wallets if nationalists ever look like succeeding in stopping mass immigration. Well, okay, well, I'll do the third and last bit in a sec. Anything to add to that, gents?
Yeah, so this is the kind of where I disagree with him. I don't think that us having a booming native birth rates would have prevented this if this is what the elites want, For the most part, the article is fine, but it's a couple of issues that I have with this, with sort of the motivation behind it. It seems to think that it's it is being done to fulfill economic ends, but I'm dubious.
Yep. Napoleon?
Do I have anything to add to this? Hell
Yeah,
no. I think that last bit of the
just
article was so retarded.
Yeah, okay. Look, I will say to Mr. X in the chat, Colin Liddell is not a moron at all. Like, he's more often right than wrong when you look at the things he has predicted. And like I say, I've had him on my show twice, so you're in the wrong shop if you want me to slag him off, because I'm not going to do that. That, however, does not mean I totally agree with him. That does not mean I totally agree with him. I think that with increasing automation and with increasing AI and this kind of stuff, which is undoubtedly coming, I don't think your overall population, particularly of unskilled people, is anywhere near as important.
No.
As it used to be. I mean, Japan has got a population problem which is similar to ours, but on the other hand, they haven't made it worse by having mass immigration into Japan. Mm-hmm. And they seem to be managing much better than we are.
Exactly.
So, as I say, I don't think that Colin's got totally correct on this. And you're humming again, Napoleon.
Oh, sorry.
If you might want to mute your mic if you feel like humming, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that automation and AI and this kind of thing is going to make that population thing seem less important. But at the same time, I agree with what Napoleon said earlier and the Albion, that, you know, there are various incentives we could give to the indigenous population to have more children. Certainly tax breaks and that kind of thing are obvious ones. You know, we used to do that. But I think you've got to make them, you've got to make them families and not for single mothers. Because I think that's the wrong sort of population growth.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, exactly. You can have children factories pumping out kids 24/7, but if they're not being raised in decent environments, then what good are they actually going to do you?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as I said, there's going to be less and less requirement. There's always going to be some requirement for unskilled and very low-skilled people, but it's going to become less and less as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. It's also, you know, it's also a misunderstanding of the economy, I think, to some degree, where we're not producing people to fill economic positions. The economy will adapt to what's here, and we will make businesses based on the people that we have available to us. You know,
yeah.
I think the economy comes after the people, not the other way around.
I mean, the other point worth pointing out is that Britain is so overcrowded. I mean, what is it? 65 million people now. There are. I mean, okay. Scotland is not too terrible outside of the big cities. There are bits of Wales and the north of England that aren't too terrible. But England, for the most part, there are bits of England which are more overcrowded than parts of India.
Yeah, and that's just the registered. You know,
yeah, and that's without the 1 to 2 million illegal immigrants which are in Britain. So it's probably more like 67 million people actually.
I think it's close. I think it's mid-70s.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's more than the official figures for certain, and even the official figures are pretty appalling. I mean, I remember, like, for most of my young life, for as long as I ever paid attention to it, the British population was 54 to 58 million, which I think, you know, for modern Western country, that's okay. But 65 million? Absolutely ridiculous. Totally crazy. Anyway, I'll read the last bit and then we'll have our final thoughts on that one. Okay, so where are we? Where did I get to? So what does this mean for nationalists? That too is pretty obvious. First, it means that just calling for a stop to immigration is not enough. That is only one wheel on a very shaky car. Even if by some miracle a nationalist party managed to get a total ban on immigration, the sheer vacuum power of declining demographics would soon overturn it. In any country with a large negative fertility rate, naive nationalism is a farce and a non-starter. Any push for zero immigration only makes sense in conjunction with pushing pro-natalism in an extremely radical way, a way that could only ever be strongly anti-feminist. Well, I'm not against that at all. Although I would redefine feminism to mean truly pro-woman in the wider sense of promoting healthy demographics for women. But all this raises the question of whether this would even be a political possibility in today's so-called developed societies. There are several reasons why it wouldn't be, and it's important to be aware of these. Effective political solutions are limited by two factors: the need for wide-scale popularity combined with reasonable practicality. While stopping mass immigration has long been a popular idea, it's not a practical idea in a society whose population is shrinking by a third or a quarter every generation, especially if the society is tied to a high population economic model. Well, we just talked about you don't have to be. Yes, nationalism's popular trump card, anti-immigrant sentiment, is not even practical without affecting other far-reaching and radical changes to society that would be a lot less popular, e.g. drastic anti-feminism, extreme pro-natalism, deep cultural realignment, anti-individualism, and its austere economic restructuring. I think he's like kind of exaggerating that stuff a bit, but there we go. That's just my own opinion. Added to this, there is a massive problem with nationalism itself, which has wasted the last 70 years or so, making itself deeply unpopular in a number of ways. The cheapest and most effective way it has done this has been to attract an undue number of freaks, losers, oddballs, shills, and then allow itself, either through carelessness, laziness, or malice, to be associated with narcissism and other unpleasant whiffs from the past. Well, I certainly don't disagree with that. For these reasons, nationalism as it stands today is simply incapable of filling the two conditions of significant political change. So is there another way? Yes, possibly, but only if the political change is not on the national scale. What does this mean? It can only mean one thing: recreating nationalism on a subnational level. If the core racial and ethnic populations of the West wish to survive, they will have to reorganize as tribes or enclaves in their own society, while finding ways to maintain their exclusive identities and group boundaries. In short, they will have to become states within states, enclaves within multinational empires, something like what Orania is in South Africa, or even what the Jews were for a long time in history. None of this sounds promising and clearly requires a lot of work, but that is exactly the situation of nationalism in societies that have been voting with their ovaries for extinction for some time now. Well, there we go. That's that. What do you think of that one, guys?
His concluding point, I think, is a realization that I've kind of come to. I don't think that changing institutions is feasible because there's too many that have rotten to the core now. So I do think that localism is something that has to be focused more on. Even doing that, I don't know. There's things are pretty bleak. I'm still optimistic, but there's a lot that's already broken, and too few people trying to fix it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Napoleon?
I just agree with him. To be honest, there's not much else that the article has that would necessarily elicit a response from me. I think it's just very, like the Albin said, it's far too fatalist. And far too fatalist.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, look, I'm not sure. I've always been anti-feminist, and I think that most nationalists are more or less anti-feminist and should be. I'm not sure that is feminism's desperately popular with the majority, even of average women these days. To be honest with you. I mean, are most women happy with their 25-year career as slaves in a little office like cubbyhole somewhere? I'm not sure that they are, to be honest.
Well, this may be where the change needs to start, then, because I would agree. I think that a lot of people would very easily flip on their perceptions of feminism. given their experiences in the real world. But it's just people having the balls to say that. It's very easy for a majority of people to just roll over and kowtow to, because there's no ramifications in saying that, oh yeah, I agree with feminism, even if you despise it. If you kiss the ring of progressivism, then you don't have to have any issues. It's only when you stand up and disagree with it you're going to have problems. So if the tide changes, and even 10% of people are more vocal about it, then I think a large portion of people would very easily flip, because all they're ever going to do in life is agree with the hegemonic views.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think the majority of average women are really deeply wedded to modern feminism. I think that some of our global homo elites would like them to be, but I'm not sure they really are. And if there was an alternative, I think that quite a lot of them would go for that. So, yeah. Napoleon, you got anything to add to that bit?
No, not really, to be honest. I'm still a bit drained from reading over the comments and fighting with Ozzy.
Yeah.
Quite...
By the way, I was just going to say, please don't talk about doxing in my chat, mate, because we.
Oh no! I didn't actually.
I know you weren't being serious, but don't even talk about that.
Yeah.
Because we certainly don't do that.
Just on whilst Duke sorts out his dog a minute, I think that one of the issues that we have is that any kind of criticism that we have towards feminism, changing the cultural perception of it, it's not just that. It's tied to the love of equality, and I think until you change that, you need to get to the root of these things before you can actually make cultural change, because ultimately feminism is a word. So yes, you can get people to disagree with it. What are they going to do? What are they going to push after it? It's going to be exactly the same things under the hood. They'll just put a new coat of paint on it. It's the love of equality that you need to try and change the cultural perception of.
Yeah, I think what we've got to replace that with is that men and women are complementary to each other. We are not
exactly
the same. We're not the same, but we complement each other. Both men and women bring things to the party, particularly when it comes to marriage and having children.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because there's this sort of Mr. Ben idea that everyone can be everything, and you can't. But you can have, in a society, you can have different people fulfill different roles, and in a family, which is a shrunken down small unit within society, that also is the case. The mother will fulfill certain roles, the father will fulfill other roles, and they're not the same, but they contribute to the whole. They cannot be the whole in and of themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that is a notion that that a lot of people now are just completely against, because the idea that one person can't have everything and be everything is just deplorable.
Yeah, and I agree with what Werner Kronos said, that I put up from the chat here. Feminism is not the revenge of women on the man, but the ugly woman on the pretty one, which I think is absolutely true. If you look at the nonsense that feminists come up with these days, to people who draw comics and filmmakers and all the rest of it, all they are against is pretty women. They're not. They just want women to be like men and to look like men.
Well, it goes back to the equality thing, because if you don't like hierarchy, then there's two things that you can do. You can either bring everyone up to the highest standard, or you can tear the highest standard down and bring them back into the dregs with everyone else. And it's exactly the same thing as we have here. you know, it's which is easier to make every female a symbol of virtue and beauty, or to just drag through the mud purity and beauty, and have them all with pierced noses, dyed hair, and 20 pounds overweight. You know, one of those is a lot easier than the other.
Napoleon, you can't spell me, but anyway. But that's all I'm going to say to that. Yeah. I mean, the central point about Colin Liddell's article that we need to get rid of this feminist nonsense is absolutely true. Where I think he loses the plot a little bit is I don't think the economic repercussions of stopping mass immigration would be anywhere near as bad as he's suggesting. I mean, for one thing, GDP is an absolutely piss poor way of measuring wealth. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm certainly sick to death of line go up crap. I really am. And as someone said in the chat earlier, look what they've done to the economy with the lockdowns over this slightly worse form of the flu that we've been closing all our economies down for the past, getting on for over 18 months now. So, you know, I think that shows you how much would the economy suffer more from stopping mass immigration than from closing most of the businesses for months at a time and stopping people going out? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have an interest in economics, but everything that is sort of accepted wisdom has just been thrown out the window. If an economy can appear to survive what we've just been through the last 2 years, then I don't know what is true anymore. So sod it. Why even make out we know what's going to happen? You know, I think it's all going to come crashing down eventually. But at the moment, you know, it seems like the money printers is going, and everyone is pretending that we're doing okay. So keep up the facade and implement the policies that we like.
You've got to recognise that there's been a massive transfer of wealth over the last 18 months from small, especially small, but also medium-sized businesses to huge multinational corporations. You know, the very heart of Globo Homo. And I myself don't think that's accidental. I think that's been done deliberately. Because obviously a small business gives the people who own it independence. And even the people who work for that small business are outside of the government system. And I don't think that our elites like that at all. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but, you know, how much evidence do you need to see before you start thinking, well, something's going on here, guys? And it's not about a virus with a 99% survival rate.
Yeah, even if it wasn't...
It's not the Black Death. It's not the Black Death.
Or the Spanish flu, as I've seen some people compare it to somehow. Yeah. Oh, well, this is the thing. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy, because it could well be that it wasn't the original cause of it, but they saw an opportunity and obviously they've seized it. You know, I don't see how anyone could question that.
I mean, all the countries of the world going in lockstep. You've got a barely tested series of vaccines, which apparently don't stop you getting the virus in the first place. So I can't understand the point of getting vaccinated for something that doesn't stop you getting it. You know, I mean, I know these people turn around, but it means you won't die. Well, you probably wouldn't die anyway, because the vast majority of people don't die from it. None of what they're doing makes any sense unless it is with the background of really changing societies. Unless you look at it that way, then none of it makes any sense to me.
The problem is that some people call you a conspiracy theorist, even when you show a video by the World Economic Forum using the term Great Reset. Yeah. And you're still accused of making up the term and you know, talking about global homogenization when it's the World Economic Forum using these exact terms. You know, some people are just never going to accept it.
And also, you look at the likes of Boris Johnson in Britain, the senile pedophile in America, Biden, Macron with his old lady wife, and the evil Merkel in Germany. all of these people using Build Back Better.
Yep.
They're all saying that's not a coincidence, you know. I mean, how dumb have you got to be to think that's a coincidence? It's just, you know, and the pushing of the green agenda, and I mean, you know, I've seen good evidence that like Britain's electricity grid couldn't actually support people having that number of electric cars. And electric cars are going to be much more expensive than current cars. They're also going to have a much shorter range. And I think that what you're going to get is they're going to add huge road taxes on, and they're effectively going to make it very difficult for ordinary people to travel by car.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's got more to do with why they're going to do that than anything to do with the so-called green agenda. And I think the green agenda generally is evil. I mean, like, I know I've argued with Ozzy before about global warming. My contention is that it's not man-made, basically. And that the stuff we do about it makes very little difference one way or the other. And often does more harm to the environment. You know, wind farms, for example, kill huge numbers of birds and bats.
Yeah. And the energy expenditure to put them up is usually not reaped throughout their lifetime.
Absolutely right. And in addition to that, of course, there are huge eyesores on the landscape. So, yeah, I mean, again, I think there's something more behind that than there is anything else. And you combine it with just everything else that's going on, you know, the increasing push towards cashless society, which means you'll have no privacy whatsoever in terms of the money you earn and where you spend it. And also, of course, they'll be able to stop you getting money or using it if they want to, if you do something bad or say something bad. You're getting the push for hate crimes, which are not crimes. You know, you can say something now and end up with a police record, but it's not a criminal record because it's not a crime. But for somehow or other, the police can keep it for not a crime. I mean, that's something going on there, guys. You've got this push for some sort of social credit system, which is obviously coming.
I was about to say that those two things are intimately linked. You know, having a police record that isn't a criminal record is obviously quite a close step to then putting the social credit system in place.
Yeah, it's very sinister, very sinister.
And combine that with the passports, it seems quite obvious that all of these things will come together, and you can then have a vaccine passport that will invalidate travel if you've been a naughty boy on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, even now, I'd say that the days of cheap and widespread air travel are probably over for most people. It's not going to affect the elites, of course, but I think for most people it will. And I mean, the other thing that people always don't look at is that these same people, like the World Economic Forum and all of that lot, are constantly saying there's too many people in the world.
Sorry, a comment in the chat is fantastic. It'd be good if you could put it up. Just Sanu, the production of billions of disposable masks during a time in which we're meant to be the most economically aware. Ecologically, sorry, aware.
Yeah. I can't find it, to be honest. I'm trying to find it at the moment.
It just says these lying beasts consistently invoking the environment.
Oh, okay, these lying beasts. I did see that. Oh, there you go. That one.
I see.
Yeah, that one. And I will just add to that. I mean, you see these filthy masks lying around the streets all over the place, constantly. And you also, if you look on the internet, you can find pictures of birds with them tangled around their legs and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's real green. And masks that, by the way, everyone in science, until this so-called pandemic started, agreed that, you know, viruses are too small to be stopped by masks. cloth masks will not stop viruses. They just won't. The virus is much too small. So it's the whole thing is pointless. It's again.
Most of these arguments are just not worth having, though, because people will say, "Well, if masks don't work, why do surgeons wear them?" And I just think, are you in a sterile environment having someone else place it on your head, or are you taking it out your back pocket, the same mask that's been in there for 3 months, just to slip it on, to wipe your head with it when you're sweating?
You sneezed into it 15 times.
But there's no point having these conversations with people that have those responses, because you're not going to change their mind.
I did see one thing. A bloke managed to get himself on the BBC by fibbing to the BBC switchboard and saying he was pro the vaccine. And he got on there and he said, "What about the fact that there's supposedly 1,500 people in the UK have died after taking the vaccine?" 1,500. That's quite a lot. And of course, the BBC guy wouldn't have any part of it, and just kept saying, "Well, why did you lie to our people?" Because of course, the BBC will never put anything on that's in the least bit anti the program. So, but I mean, this is the government's yellow card reporting system, whereby doctors have to put down, this person had the vaccine and he died within, a week or whatever it is. And maybe not all of those people died from the vaccine, but some of them probably did.
Yeah, well, equally, this is the thing with the reporting. Equally, a lot of people that had COVID have not died of COVID. You have it one way or the other. But again, you can't expect consistency with these people, because
I remember in Victoria last week or the week before, they said, 2 people have died from China virus, and you had to read a long way down the article to see one of them was 92 and the other one was 96. It's funny. People in their 90s, they tend to die,
I don't know if this is still the case. I believe it is, but for a long time, the average life expectancy was lower than the expected age of death from corona. It was something like typical age of death being 17, being 75, whatever, and age of death
for men in
76.
I looked this up. For men in UK, the average life expectancy now is 78, and for women it's 80. And women, it's 83. And most people who are dying from China virus are over 83. So, they're mostly already have exceeded the average lifespan. So, again, there's just so much nonsense involved in it. I mean, we all know that, the way the government reporting system was going, is if you were told you had China virus and then you got hit by a car 2 weeks later, you were put down as a China virus death. That's just a fact. You were. It's because they wanted to inflate the figures. But it's so bloody crazy. Aussie in the chat. This is pretty typical. There you go. My grandpa, bless his soul, passed away from a bone issue. He was added to the COVID death toll. But that's what they do. It's just a bloody lie. And of course, because of the MSM is in total lockstep behind this stuff, they carry on with it. It's the same as they stop kids going to school. The China virus is no danger to children whatsoever, and they want to inject children. Why? When we're in no danger from it, unless they're already very, very, very sick indeed, so sick that they're unlikely to live another year anyway. They ain't going to die from China virus. And those kids wouldn't be in school anyway.
This is the thing. Again, all of these arguments have been said over and over, but anyone that thinks that these systems needed to be put in place to protect older people, do you not think that people would just take extra precautions when visiting relatives anyway, or care homes would take extra precautions anyway? It doesn't have to be a worldwide thing. You can have industry specific extra precautions if it's if it makes sense, which in the case of a care home it would do.
I mean, there is another point which is worth bringing up, of course, is that no one is calculating at the moment how many people are going to die from heart disease and cancer and other serious diseases and issues which are not being treated because of this stuff. But it's almost certainly going to be a lot more people than die from China virus.
Oh, from personal experience, I know that. A lot of appointments have been cancelled that have led to deaths that really weren't necessary.
Yeah, and GPs have not been really operating properly for some time. And they keep saying, do you remember it was going to be 14 days to flatten the curve? And, we'll only get one chance to do this. And here we are 18 months later and nothing has changed. And as I say, I think people in Britain are going to be in for a rude awakening come the autumn there, because all this lockdown shit is going to be put back in place again. And I can almost guarantee it. I will be amazed if it's not, to be honest with you.
And who's going to be blamed for being the cause? Is
those who didn't get the vaccine. Even though the vaccine doesn't stop you catching it. Most of the people admitted to hospital in recent times in UK are people who've had 2 doses of the vaccine. Doesn't stop you catching it. What's the point of a vaccine that doesn't stop you catching something? Someone needs to explain this to me. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I had my child have the normal vaccines when he was a little kid. And I've been vaccinated heaps of times for the military. I'm not an anti-vaxxer at all. I'm just an anti-not tested vaccine that doesn't seem to do any good.
Yeah, exactly. But again, you can't have nuance in an argument. You either think that vaccines are a lie, or you take everything that's presented to you. Nuance is not allowed.
Well, yeah, and if the MSM only gives one side of the story, which of course they do, that's pretty much what happens. All right, guys, I think we're going to probably end it there. But before I do, I will ask the Albion, any last thoughts or anything you want to show?
I'll show my channel, I suppose. Over at Magnum Opie, we do semi-regular book reviews, and tomorrow we're going to be discussing Michelle Houellebecq's Serotonin, which is going to be pretty divisive.
Put the link in the private chat, the Albion, and then I'll put it on the main chat so that people can just go and click on it.
Okay, I will pop that in there now.
Napoleon, anything you would, any final thoughts or anything you want to show?
Speaking of channels, I completely forgot that I actually had a channel, and I was supposed to put a video up there quite a while ago. So thanks for reminding me.
There you go, guys. The one I'm just putting in the chat now, that's the link to the Albion's channel. Do go and check him out and subscribe. Do you want to put your channel on in the chat there, Napoleon, or?
Yeah. I'll do
all right, put it in the private chat, mate, and then I'll put it up on the public chat.
All right, give it a minute. Yeah.
It's like listening to Thomas the Tank Engine.
I just can't stop humming it. It's a thing.
That's all right, mate. Don't worry. I do it sometimes. I just forget. Right, here we go. Okay, so the first one is to the Albion's YouTube channel, and the second one is to Napoleon's YouTube channel, which is just going up now. There you go, guys. I'm going to do what I usually do, play us out of a tune. So we'll do that. Soon I can get it to work, that is. Okay, that was the White Lancers, which is was the regimental march of the 17th Lancers, who were also known as the Death or Glory Boys because of their regimental badge. They saw service famously in the Charge of the Light Brigade. They also took part in the Indian Mutiny and in the Anglo-Zulu War as well, where they charged the Zulus at Lundi, the final battle. So thanks for joining us, guys. Please don't forget to like the stream and subscribe to the channel. We are getting close to 550 subscribers now, I think. So, yeah. And I will see you all next week for Splendid Isolation number 36. Have a good week, ladies and gents. And the Albion and Napoleon, thank you for coming on as guests.
No problem. See you later.
Thanks for having me.